There are a variety of different bears in a variety of different places around the planet. And if you dare to venture far enough north to the Arctic, you can find some pretty gigantic bears, long ago referred to as ice bears or white bears. Today, they're generally called polar bears. And make no mistake, they are very large animals. Some sources like WWF even refer to them as the largest bear in the world. But is this actually true? Just how big can they get? And are they really larger than Kodiaks? Let's find out. Quick side note, if you haven't seen my video on brown bears, you might want to look at that first. Polar bears are spread out over multiple countries in the Arctic and surrounding areas. Canada, Greenland, Svalbard, part of Norway, Russia, and then Alaska in the US. There are an estimated 20 to 30,000 polar bears spread out through these regions, though it would seem Canada is home to the highest number of polar bears, about 16,000. Though I will say there are some parts of their range, like northern Russia, where we don't have enough data to know how many polar bears live there. These areas are considered data deficient because tracking and studying the bears in such remote regions is difficult. With polar bears living in different areas, you might think maybe there are separate subspecies, but it doesn't seem so, at least right now. While they are broken down into maybe 19 to 20 known populations, depending on the source, they all seem to be categorized as Ursus maritimus. There is some controversy about the extinct Ursus maritimus tyrannus, great name, though that may or may not really be a thing. It's a little bit controversial. Anyway, while coastal grizzlies, Kodiaks, and other large brown bears generally have a diet of, well, a variety of things, salmon seems to be the key to make them big. Polar bears seem to rely on larger prey, though, in general, when they are able to hunt on the ice. Now don't get me wrong, brown bears obviously can and do eat larger prey, as well as a variety of plant matter. It's just when it comes to the big ones, salmon seems to be the key. But things are different with polar bears. Polar bears are considered marine mammals. They are the only bears considered as such. The name Ursus maritimus means maritime bear. This is due to the fact that they rely on a marine ecosystem so much. Of course, there is some variation in their diet, but it seems like they really like to eat seals. According to a paper on Science Direct on polar bear diet composition, it states, quote, "Ring seal was the primary prey of bears throughout Nunavut, followed by bearded seal." On Springer Nature, there is a paper called The Diet of Polar Bears from Svalbard, Norway, and they found when looking at 119 polar bears that the diet specifically show, quote, "Ring seals occur in 62.2% of the scat samples examined." The Canadian Journal of Zoology on variation in winter diet of southern Beaufort Sea polar bears states, "Ring seals and bearded seals represent the majority of the polar bear annual diet." So they seem to like eating seals. They also eat other prey too, like some small beluga whales, as well as other marine mammals. Also, I used to always hear polar bears are exclusive carnivores, but the study from Svalbard also stated, along with seal in the scat samples, that various terrestrial plants and marine algae also occurred frequently in the scat. Also, on Natural Habitat Adventure, it states that, quote, "During the summer thaw, polar bears supplement their diet with berries, fungi, and plants, as well as kelp from along the coastline. These alternative foods, while adding variety to the polar bear's diet, do not provide sufficient caloric intake to keep the bears from losing weight." So it seems they certainly need the meat, but I don't know, it feels like one of those weird facts that keeps popping up, that they never eat any plants. Again, obviously they need to hunt food on ice during the winter. It's just there's a tiny bit of nuance there. So polar bears should be larger during winter months when they can hunt on the ice. That's when they can eat all the marine mammals, when they can catch them. So how big are they? And are they actually bigger than Kodiak bears? Well, I want to look at this from a few different angles, maybe 3 different layers. First, perhaps more general information, but what ranges are usually given? In the Princeton Field Guide to Mammals of North America, 2nd edition, it gives the weight range of male polar bears between 4 to 800 kilos, 882 to 1,764 pounds. By the way, since adult male bears are larger than females, I'm going to be mostly using male weights. The same guide has the brown bear range for all brown bears in North America between 80 to 600 kilos, 176 to 1,322 pounds. It gives an overall range of brown bears rather than specific Kodiaks or the coastal grizzlies of Alaska, though in the paragraph underneath it does mention how they are larger than your average brown bear. So perhaps the upper 600 kilos is probably referring to them. Now, this is just one source giving what I imagine is an approximate range, but it would suggest that polar bears are a little bigger. In the book Bears of North America by naturalist and photographer Stan Tekiela, he states that Kodiak bears are the largest of the brown bears, with males weighing 15 to 1,700 pounds, which is 680 to 771 kilos. So that is fairly big, but what about polar bears? Well, the author does describe them as the, quote, largest of the bears, though when it comes to specific weights, the author writes that, quote, polar bears are not significantly larger than brown bears on Alaska's coast and Kodiak Island. The largest polar bears and brown bears weigh 1,400 to 2,000 pounds, so 635 to 907 kilos. So not a significant difference. But the polar bears might be slightly larger. Since they wrote 1,700 pounds for the upper range in Kodiaks, does that mean that the 2,000 pound figure here is more for the polar bears? Perhaps, but again, they did say it was close, so it might not be exactly that simple. Also, slight tangent, but bear with me, the author said something important that I have to slide in every video on size. Quote, estimating the weight or size of a bear in the wild is difficult, and animal weight is usually perceived to be much greater than the actual amount. People will report a normal-sized bear as the largest they've seen if the bear has surprised or threatened them. Some overestimate weight as much as 10 times. So just keep that in mind, especially when we get to some incredible individual bear claims later in the video. Since the Kodiak and large coastal grizzlies reside in Alaska and polar bears also live in Alaska, I thought it might be worth asking Alaska Fish and Game. So I sent them an email, and within a day they actually responded. I asked if they had any specific measurements on record, but unfortunately they didn't have that data on specific weights and lengths, but they did provide a range. For polar bears, they said the average is 6 to 1,200 pounds, 272 to 544 kilos, and 8 to 10 feet, about 3 meters in length. But the largest males can weigh in excess of 1,700 pounds, so 771 kilos. For brown bears, it states 5 to 900 pounds, 227 to 408 kilos, with exceptionally large males approaching 1,400 pounds. Or 635 kilos. So it would seem that polar bears would be considered to be a bit larger, though they said, quote, polar bears are the size of large brown bears. So again, it's pretty close. Ranges are a good basis, and I appreciate all the numbers we have, but sometimes we want to get a little more specific. And when we compare some specific measurements, so we're going to try and compare that, but also, as Baryonyx suggested, include average weight for comparison. Let's see what we can find. If we look at the 2nd edition of Wild Mammals of North America on a section on polar bears, under the category on size and weight, they describe how they measured 94 males that were over 5 years old and found the average or mean weight was 489 kilos or 1,078 pounds. And quote, the largest bear in that group was a 13-year-old, which weighed 654 kilos, or 1,442 pounds. Though we are looking at overall mass, I think it's interesting to note that they also found that when referring to exceptionally large males, as in ones that were so big they couldn't even weigh them with their equipment, they said, quote, total lengths of males in the Beaufort Sea of Alaska ranged up to 285 centimeters, 9.4 feet, Such an animal may reach nearly 4 meters, 13 feet, when standing on its hind legs, and 1.7 meters, which is 5.5 feet, or shoulder height, when standing on all four legs. Amazing, and I see where they're coming from, but those measurements of length are so high, I feel like they would need to be based on actual measurements to become valid. But very interesting. In 2010, there was research done in the Chukchi Sea where they tagged and measured multiple bears, including 16 adult males with an average weight of 433 kilos, or 955 pounds, and the max was 574 kilos, or 1,266 pounds. But the word on the bear forums is that if you want big polar bears, you need to look at the areas around Fox Basin. There is a pretty notable paper from 1984 where they weighed 10 males and got an average of 450 kilos, or 992 pounds, which doesn't seem huge, but there was a very big male that we'll get to. Then there are results of a research program the year later in 1985. They caught 10 bears, 7 over 500 kilos, 3 over 600 kilos, and 1 over 700 kilos, giving an average of 600 kilos, or 1,323 pounds. But really, what people are referring to, I think, is a graph that was published in 2014 by Rode and colleagues on the different body mass of different polar bear populations. And if you look at the males in Fox Basin, it would seem that they are in the mid 500 to low 600 kilos. So maybe somewhere between 1,200 to 1,340 pounds. So that's not super comprehensive. But before we go further, let's just do a little comparison between some Kodiaks. Though this is where it gets a little bit tricky. In the 2013 annual report of the Kodiak Brown Bear Trust, there is an attempt to look at adult male Kodiak size. Now, the author writes that this isn't done very often because of how difficult it is. So the way they did it is they had Kodiaks that were killed by hunters cut into, quote, manageable portions and weighed with hand scales. And then they added about 25 pounds to account for blood or other fluids lost in the weighing process. The thing is, even though they had 21 males, they said they were only interested in large bears. So they said, I limited the sample to males weighing more than 800 pounds in spring and 1,000 pounds in fall. And then they stated weights of 3 males taken in fall hunts averaged 1,277 pounds. So that's 579 kilos. Very impressive, very large, but it's kind of a skewed result because they are only taking the average of specific larger Kodiaks, so taking the small sample size of the very biggest ones and then ignoring others, the smaller ones that would drop the average down. If you remember in the last video, Willard A. Troyer weighed a number of Kodiaks, and 4 large males were between 960 to 1,346 pounds in fall, so 610 kilos. Vic Barnes also measured some large males, again looking for the upper limit rather than the average, and the largest he found were 566 kilos, 674 kilos, and 690 kilos, which would give us an average of 643 kilos, or 1,418 pounds. So again, if we were just looking at this without knowing all the details, and with only these measurements, you could kind of see why you'd think Kodiaks might weigh more. And there is something to that, to be fair. It's just this is very selective. We're picking out the largest. So for example, if I took the 3 largest polar bear individuals recorded, at least the biggest ones that I can find, and got the average of them, it would be 710 kilos, or 1,565 pounds. So now would be a good time to tell you, I actually found out about the Fox Basin info because I stumbled upon some posts on a few different forums, as well as Quora, that listed a variety of measurements of polar bears from papers and individuals recorded, reaching a sample size of 1,000. And with 1,000 polar bears, they got an average of 513 kilos, 1,130 pounds. They then did the same thing with Kodiaks with a total of 56 and got an average of 499 kilos, or 1,100 pounds. So it is very close, I don't think they still have a Quora account, but I'll still link the posts if you want to try and follow them. I think they were also building off the work of a user on the Wild Fact forum. He used an overall smaller sample size of polar bears and got 446 kilos, or 983 pounds as the average. This is a very impressive collection that both of these people have done, and others too, so credit to them. I will say I recognize some of the sources, but others I've struggled to find or get access to, so I can't confirm all the sizes. But that's just a me problem. The other thing I'll say is that for the Kodiak measurements, they did use some of the sources I mentioned, where the weights were only taken for the largest males found. But they also included some exceptionally large individual polar bears, so maybe it sort of evens out. It really shows how a few different sources can skew the data one way or another. I still think if we had more adult Kodiaks included, the average would be a bit lower and the polar bears would have more of a clear advantage, especially when you consider the Fox Basin average isn't too far off the upper limit for Kodiaks. So maybe when looking at average weights, it's close, but I think advantage polar bear if you're being truly honest about it. But again, depending on how you look at the data or which data you use, it could be closer to Kodiaks or even give Kodiaks the advantage. But wait, there's a third layer to all of this. When I make how big videos, I don't usually care as much for the average weight. Usually, I want to look at the outliers, the shacks, the genetic freaks that are exceptionally large. So let's compare some of the absolute biggest Kodiaks to the absolute biggest polar bears that we know of. If you remember the last video, we had the 1894 incident where J.C. Tolman shot a Kodiak bear at English Bay on Kodiak Island that weighed 1,656 pounds, or 751 kilos. Using the stretched skin as measurement, possibly it could have stood up to 10 feet, over 3 meters tall. This is from Animals, Facts and Feats. I said last time I wasn't too sure if this was completely true, but it's not that wild. There certainly are Kodiaks measured around 700 kilos. Maybe in the past they got even bigger. So let's just say it was accurate for now. Well, when we look at the largest polar bear, scientifically measured from 1985, from that paper in Fox Basin, we get, quote, a 16-year-old male that weighed 803 kilos. 1,767 pounds. If you remember the exceptional length measurements estimated for some males in Alaska, these were for males that were too large to be weighed with equipment, and thus they speculated that those males were similar in size to the 1985 bear. So they thought maybe the super big bears they couldn't weigh were also close to 800 kilos. But we can go bigger, and this bear is relatively easy to go and see. Sometimes called the White King, this polar bear, originally shot in the Arctic Circle, was stuffed and today can be found at a hotel in Elko, Nevada. It holds the record for the largest stuffed bear and is reported to be 998 kilos, or 2,200 pounds, and 3.2 meters, or 10 foot 4 inches tall. A true giant, or at least I think it is. Some bear fans question its authenticity. But I mean, we can go and see it. Is it really not authentic? Maybe the measurements aren't quite right? I thought you would have had to weigh the animal before transporting it at least. Apparently it was first moved to Colorado where it was stuffed, and then to Nevada. I mean, wouldn't someone have weighed it before moving it to any of those places? I did email the hotel themselves asking if the numbers were based on measurements or estimates, and if it was the original bear or a replica, but they haven't gotten back to me yet. Well, either way, the 803 kilo male seems to be the biggest bear we have on record, or is it? Don't count brown bears out just yet. I got a comment under the brown bear video that I think is worth looking at. The person said, quote, "This is poorly researched. The largest bear ever actually recorded was actually weighed. Yep, it was shot and killed and weighed in 1866 in Valley Center, California. No other bear anywhere ever, and not even estimated from the bones of extinct bears, comes close. Not the Kodiak bear or any other type of bear has ever been heard of. It was actually weighed at 2,200 pounds. Now, I'll admit, I hadn't heard of the Valley Center bear. Somehow, it didn't come up in any of the records or books or sites or papers that I looked at, so as you can imagine, I was very intrigued. So I found the Valley Center History Museum. They have a website, and they do have accounts of the bear. There aren't grizzlies in California today, but there were back then, and this bear was apparently causing problems, quote, threatening both man and cattle. Actually, I don't know if it really did anything or it was just threatening to do things, but either way, the bear was killed, loaded onto a wagon, and drove 8 miles to a ranch. Now, the commenter said it was weighed, and it was. They used cattle scales, and it weighed 2,200 pounds, about 998 kilos, and it's not even a Kodiak. So I guess this is the largest brown bear ever. And it's the size of White King, right? No problem, no issue, all good? Well, it does say it was weighed. However, there were others who confirmed the bear was real, but they didn't confirm the size. In fact, one man said the exact weight was 1,950 pounds, 884 kilos, and another said, quote, well over 1,000 pounds, which technically the other two weights are well over 1,000 pounds, but you know, it'd be a weird way to describe a 2,200 pound bear. Maybe it really was 2,200 pounds. Maybe that was more achievable back when there were bears there, and they were probably bigger when they had more habitat and more prey and all of that. But having conflicting weights from different people from the area, it makes it tricky. We also don't have the body of the bear, and the skull was lost. So you can decide for yourself. Returning to Kodiaks and polar bears, it is close. In the Great Bear Almanac by Gary Brown, he suggests that it's best just to call it a draw, and I think that is a fair position to take. They are both very large bears, capable of incredible sizes. While some have tried and made good efforts comparing their sizes, there's not really a 100% comprehensive survey. I don't even think that's possible. And also, things are always changing. Sizes will range over time. Though, if I had to choose, I think I'd give the edge to the polar bear. If you average out some of the larger ones of both species, or look at the largest on record, or weight ranges given, it seems like polar bears usually come out a little larger. But again, it does depend. It is sort of surprising because I would have thought, since size is more about overall mass, that it would have gone to the Kodiaks. Because, no offense to any Kodiaks watching, but when you look at footage of the bears back to back, and you look at footage of Kodiaks in the fall, they seem more full.
Dude, we've been through this, okay? I'm cultivating mass. Stop saying that. You are not cultivating mass, and if you are, stop cultivating and start harvesting. Bro, check this out. Try to move me. Well, I'm not gonna try and move me, bro. Take a running start. Take a running start.
Did you want me to read these test results or not?
Anyway, thank you to my wonderful patrons and members, and thank you for watching.